John R Dougherty is an author who's debuting his newest series, Holy Terror, in which he takes the reader on a wild and thought-provoking ride where everything you thought you knew about the angelic realm is explored. And John joins us now. How are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great, Toby. How about you?
I'm excellent, thank you. So this book, The Holy Terror, of course, as I mentioned, it explores the angelic realm. What made you want to write a book about angels?
Well, Toby, I've been fascinated with angels for a long time. That started really with growing up, going to church, reading the Bible, looking at stories about angels in the Bible. And I've also been really fascinated with all of the books that have come out over the years where people have written about their experiences of potential supposed encounters that they've had with angels. So I've always had a really deep interest in stories around angels and their activity and what their role is and what they do. And so I've just always had that interest in angels. And so a long time ago, I had come up with this idea of a story around a rogue angel, which is the impetus to the book Holy Terror.
We often forget, maybe, but angels are such a big part of literature and entertainment in general, maybe. Arguably the most famous Christmas film of all time. It's a Wonderful Life is all about an angel, and there's loads of songs about angels. How do you make your book about angels different from some of the other ones?
Right. I think that that is a challenge. We've all heard, seen a lot of movies, read a lot of books. A lot of people have a variety of ways of explaining angels and what they do. I think what I was looking for was definitely something that's a bit unique. And I've always had this thought that, gosh, it's frustrating to see all the terrible and evil things that people do to each other out in the world. Lots of good things out there too, but clearly we hear lots of bad things that go on. And
Yeah.
a thought that I had a long time ago was, wow, if an angel of God were to go out and try to put a stop to some of these bad guys, he could just really mop them up.
Were there any challenges when you were writing this book?
You know what? I have done a lot of writing over the years, but it's always been in kind of an expository fashion, kind of more of a writing about particular topics or subjects, or whether it be in the church setting or whether it be just in my professional. I'm an IT professional by trade, and I've done lots of writing in both of those kinds of contexts. But writing fiction was a really significant challenge for me. It just wasn't what I expected. It wasn't as easy. I don't know if I thought it was going to be easy, but writing fiction was really just a big change for me in how I did my writing. And, I thought that I had done a good job writing my novel. And then several years ago, I got involved with a writing coach, Melody Bussey, and she was a tremendous help for me. I wouldn't have gotten to this point with my book without her help. She really showed me a lot of things about writing fiction that I just didn't understand. Telling about the action versus showing the action. That's one thing that she would harp on with me a lot. In my writing, I was telling the reader what was happening rather than acting it out, showing it to the reader. So that was probably, for me, the biggest challenge I had.
And she's good at getting you the best interviews on the best shows.
Exactly. She clearly is the best at that.
Yeah. The transition from writing about real life things to fiction can be difficult, and angels are a thing that a lot of people believe in. I'm guessing you do. So how much of the story is based on things that are true and things that you believe to be true, and then how much is fiction?
Well, there is a lot of fiction in my novel, Toby, of course, but
Yeah.
I certainly, the Bible and what's recorded in the Bible was a big inspiration for me. So I have certainly lifted a lot of information that you can read about in the Bible, and I've actually in my book, I've actually tapped into some of the stories that are recorded, particularly in the Old Testament of the Bible, and utilize that in my storyline. So a lot of what I have included in the book about places around the United States and other parts of the world, I certainly researched and actually using real locations like real restaurants or real street names or things of that nature. I've actually used real places out of geography to
Yeah.
use in the story. But certainly a lot of what I have recorded, what I've written in the book, is based on biblical information. So I suppose some people might consider that factual, some might not. But I'm a person of faith, so I certainly believe in what the Bible records and believe it to be true. And so, in that sense, I would say a lot of what I have written is lifted right out of Scripture and is true in that standpoint. Geography wise, I've used real locations. And, a lot of it is certainly, my own imagination has come into play for certain.
The stuff you take from the Bible, is it kind of non-arguable stuff? Because what I mean is sometimes people would argue there's some people who take a quote from the Bible, take it completely out of context just to
Oh, sure.
justify an argument.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I would say that I've learned to try to avoid those kinds of circumstances over the years and really try to keep things in context. But certainly some of the things that I've lifted out of the Bible are, like I've quoted something that was recorded in the scriptures as a line, for example, in my book. There's several characters from the Bible that make appearances throughout my book. So, I'm actually pulling things that they have said in the Bible and incorporated that into the storytelling in the book.
That's quite impressive. It's a bit of a crossover, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Were there any surprises along the way when you were writing the book? I mean, did it have an ending that you weren't expecting?
I probably the ending is certainly going to be a bit of a twist for the readers, but it was something that I kind of had in my head how I wanted the story to end. And as you mentioned at the outset, it is part of a trilogy. So I've kind of pulled a Star Wars or an Indiana Jones on people because I'm starting with the middle of the trilogy. So
Yeah.
this first book, Holy Terror, is really the middle story. So there is a prequel that I'm working on, and it's going to go back and give a lot of background, a lot of information about why the characters are who they are, what brought them to the point that they are in the current book. And then the sequel is actually going to be picking up right where the current book leaves off. So there's not much of a gap from the current book into the sequel or the prequel. The sequel, but the prequel
Yeah.
is going to go back in time significantly over a long period of time back into history to kind of help set the scene for what ended up happening in the current book.
Yeah. And I'm not that big on Star Wars, so I could be talking complete nonsense here, but I think it's a genuine fan thing that the prequel series wasn't as good as the other ones. So are you hoping that your prequel will still be up to scratch?
I would have to agree with that, Toby. I was not a huge fan of the prequel trilogy, but yes, I'm very confident that my prequel will be even better than the current book.
Even though the Star Wars films were released out of sequence, it's generally agreed that you should watch them by order of release. So you go for the first one, then the prequel, then the sequel. So for reading your books, do you suggest reading them in order of release or in order of when they're actually set?
I would certainly say in order of release because I think once all three books are out, you could pick them up and read them in order, and it would make sense.
Mm.
But what I have done in the current book is dropped all kinds of Easter eggs into the story
Yeah.
that make references to things that have happened in the past. And I do that intentionally to try to pique the reader's interest to get them to think, what does that mean? Or what's that referencing?
Yeah.
And so I think that will make reading the prequel, once I get that published, it'll make that all the more interesting because people will be able to say, Okay, now I remember that this happened in the first book, and now there's explanation for it here in the prequel. So I would say in release order would be most ideal.
Yeah. And I don't want to make it all about Star Wars again, but just because maybe there's a similarity, in the first Star Wars series, there's a plot twist in it that if you were to watch it in order of when they're set, you would have already known the plot twist, so it would kind of ruin it. Is there stuff like that
Exactly.
in your books?
Yeah, I would say that that's definitely going to be the case in my writing as well. That yeah, if you were to wait and read the prequel first, it would kind of there would be some spoilers in there for things that I'm trying to create in the current book, things that I'm trying to create mystery around and just intrigue, you know.
And do you think that each book can stand alone, or do you recommend reading them as a series?
No, I really believe that they can stand alone. I think that if you were to read the current book, the one that we're talking about today, Holy Terror, that it would be a great read for you. That it would, you'd probably be left with some questions. And the way the book ends is it's not exactly a cliffhanger. In fact, before I had Melody involved, there was a bigger cliffhanger at the end, and she recommended that I cut that and save it for the sequel. So I think you could easily read the current book by itself and be happy with the story. But I hope that I'm creating some excitement though for people to say, "Wow, I want to see what happens, or I want to see why some of these things happened in the first place." So I hope that to create some of that excitement. But I think definitely each book could stand by itself as a read on its own.
Do you have plans to make the book into something cinematic?
I really do. I think it feels like a pretty lofty goal for me right now. It feels like something that's a stretch goal, but I definitely want to. I'm such a huge movie fan. I'm a movie buff. I always say there's a movie quote for every occasion in life. So I can always think of some quote from some movie that's very appropriate to my situation that I'm in. But I just tend to think cinematically as I was writing the book.
Yeah.
And so I kind of have visions in my head of how things could look on the big screen. But so I absolutely hope that at some point it can turn into a big screen show, whether that be on, an actual movie release, or, maybe it's one of the many streaming services that are out there that everybody's paying subscriptions for and watching it on their TVs rather than on the big screen. I'd be thrilled with either of those outcomes.
I guess you can self-publish books these days, so I guess you can self-publish a film too, but then you still need to pay for actors and stuff.
That seems like that'd be a huge task, but I think you could. Yeah.
And if you had to cast one major Hollywood actor in the film today, who would you pick?
Well, I really consider that my book has three main characters. And so there's two police detectives, because the story starts out as a crime-solving mystery with Miami, Florida police detectives trying to solve these grisly, gruesome crime scenes that they keep finding. So the two detectives, the names are Lane Madigan and Ian Jelani. And so Lane Madigan, I've had in my head for quite a long time that Chris Pratt would be the perfect person to play that role. And then the Ian Jelani police detective, I see one of my favorite actors currently is Idris Elba, which I think he's great. And I think he would be perfect as my Ian Jelani character. And then for the main character overall, who is an angel, is an angel of God. I see that character being played by Alan Ritchie, who is fairly new to me. The first time I saw him was in the Amazon Prime Video series Jack Reacher, and he is a big, muscular, tough guy. And I just thought, oh, he would be the ideal person to play the character of the angel, who is kind of a large, muscular, tough, entity.
Yeah. Well, in the meantime, what's coming up for you after this book? What's the timeline for the prequel and sequels being released? And then have you got anything else after that?
I do. I've actually a couple of things related to the current book that are coming up very soon. Is I'm working with my and I did the self-publishing route, by the way. So I
Yeah.
went through a company called Book Baby, which they've been great. I really have enjoyed working with them. They've been really helpful. But they're working on the ebook version for me so that it can be made available, on the Kindle or on a variety of electronic platforms. So the ebook should be coming out within the next few weeks. And then I'm also working with a guy by the name of Steve Osarchik, who is out on the East Coast, and he is a voiceover talent that I found, and he is going to work on producing the audiobook for me. So I'm really excited about the audiobook. I'm a huge audible.com fan. I tend to do a lot more listening to books these days than I do literally picking up an actual copy of a book and reading it, which I still do
Yeah.
periodically. But I love to listen to books on Audible, and so I just find that there's many opportunities I have to listen to books as while I'm driving or while I'm taking a walk or what have you. So I'm really excited about getting the Audible version produced, and I feel like that's going to be completed by the end of April. As far as the prequel, that's the next project I have that I've kind of gotten a start on that, but I really need to lock in and start working on that, get more focused on that. I have big hopes of at least having it back to melody to help me do the editing on it by the end of the year, and then sometime next year is when I would be targeting the sequel to be completed. And then, yes, there's a few other book ideas floating around in my head. Even the thought of some spin-off stories that I feel like I could easily create around the same character, who's by the way, his name is Thumos, which is a Greek word for fire or passion or heatedness. So that's the name of my main character. But I feel like I have several ideas of some spin-off stories that I could create for him as well.
Sounds exciting. And in the meantime, this book is called Holy Terror, and you won't miss it in the shop because it's got a nice, attractive cover and it's got a crucifix instead of the T. Where are we able to find it? I take it it's on Amazon, because that's usually where you get books, and anywhere else.
Oh, yes. Yeah, you can find it on bookbaby.com. That's where I did my self-publishing work.
Yeah.
So you can certainly purchase it today on bookbaby.com. You can find it on Amazon. It's in a pre-order status on Amazon, but I believe that the date is March the 29th that it's actually going to be released on Amazon. But you can find it on Amazon right now and select a pre-order, and then when it becomes available by the 29th, it'll ship out to you. So those are the two ways that you can purchase the book right now.
Excellent. Well, many thanks for talking to us today. It's been great having you on the show.
Toby, thanks so much for having me. It's been great meeting with you, and I really appreciate you hosting me on your show today. Thanks very much.